for the last 35 years or so on the role of acceleration for the gifted. The focus that I'm going to take in terms of my comments here in the next few minutes have to do with the role of acceleration in teaching content. We've done it routinely in the area of mathematics. We have done it less routinely in the area of science, two areas that both need attention when it comes to content-based learning for the gifted. Giving students the opportunity to learn beyond what they already know is the fundamental premise here. So a good employment of diagnostic and prescriptive approaches are key to fast-paced learning. Again, this is not self-paced learning. It is fast-paced learning determined by the actual level of learning that the student has achieved, and acknowledging that not every learner in the classroom will be at the same level for purposes of the delivery of instruction, which means different levels need to be able to be accommodated within the same learning context. That acceleration then in the content areas becomes an important part of what we're about. The publication called What Works is a publication that I worked on when I was at William & Mary that really represents 20 years of this curriculum development and research that I have just provided a very brief litany of. But if you're interested, this publication has now been updated under the current executive director at the Center for Gifted Education, Tracy Cross, and is available online at the center. And I have that web address for you at the conclusion of the presentation. Well, if that's what we know, if we know what to do in terms of building good curriculum, if we know what to do in terms of the delivery of that curriculum, and if we know what to do when it comes to assessing authentic learning of that curriculum, then what is it that's not happening that we need to be paying attention to? I'm going to be focusing for a very short period of time on these points because I think these are things that you may want to be asking questions about, particularly as they relate to the context in India. But the first one is really how to implement research-based best practices. Most schools, by definition, are somewhat chaotic in terms of how they do their business. Human beings do pretty much what they're able to do within a given period of time. And so we don't have a standardized delivery system anywhere that I've observed, particularly in the world, not just in the United States. So when it comes to implementing research-based practices, I think schools and larger regional entities have to be very sensitive to what, in fact, is going to make that happen. And business as usual will not make that happen. Implementing gifted education in an effective way means that you are paying attention to the importance of these implementation practices, to being sure that teachers, in fact, have the opportunity to see themselves teaching, to see each other teaching, for others to observe them, to have feedback sessions that suggest, how could I do this lesson better? How can I be focusing more on higher level thinking than I am at the present time? Are my questions sufficiently challenging? These are ongoing questions that need to be a part of the ongoing repertoire of schools in order to make research-based best practices work. That's not the only thing that matters, but monitoring classrooms and engaging teachers in the business of learning themselves is an important part of the overall success story. I also think that in order for research-based practices to work, we have to address what I will call intractable problems. I've been in this field for 45 years. In 45 years, we have focused all that time on a major intractable problem of how to take kids who are coming from low-income homes with very little background in education, either because their parents haven't attended college or because they're so poor that they focus only on survival skills within the context of those homes. How do we ensure that those students are not left behind when it comes to programs for the gifted? That is an intractable problem in the United States, and it has been for 45 years. It is an intractable problem everywhere in the world, and in my view, it will continue to be for some time. That intractable problem, however, has to be addressed, and has to be addressed systematically within the context of your programs and service delivery. Was very pleased to read recently that, in fact, India is trying to address this in a very systematic way. And I think that that's a very important part of your overall implementation plan. The third issue that I think has plagued us as a field as an ongoing problem is the need to institutionalize gifted programs and services. When we think about funding in the United States for any program, no matter whether it's gifted and talented or in any of the subject areas or in any particular issues, that funding always determines what people will focus on. Once the funding runs out, then it is very hard to get people to continue to implement the nature of what has gone on. So one of these issues is, how do we institutionalize programs and services when the glitz of doing something new and different has worn off and the funding support has gone away? How do we ensure that top-notch education continues regardless? That is a real challenge for us, and I'm sure it is a challenge for you as well. Well, how do we find out what, in fact, will help us with some of these issues that I've raised? I think there are three things that help. They don't solve the problems necessarily, but they are good places to start. And so I recommend them to you as perhaps, at least in my 45 years, the best that we've been able to do in terms of institutionalization, promoting institutionalization at the classroom level as well as at the school level. And that is to create, first of all, model sites. People want to see what's going on for gifted and talented learners. I'm often asked the question, what does an effective classroom for the gifted actually look like? Well, it's much easier if you can actually show people through a videotape and other means, classroom visitation, if you will, what in fact the nature of that dynamic really should look like. Not what it does necessarily look like, but what it should look like. So model sites are very helpful in terms of doing that. They don't do it all, but they do some things for us in that regard. I also have found over the years that cross-agency collaboration makes a huge difference. Schools and universities are natural collaborators. Teachers understand developmental levels of learners. They understand their learners in a particular context. University people understand content, and they understand the latest research related to the delivery of that content in schools. Those partnerships have to be solid in order for research-based best practices to penetrate and to become institutionalized in schools. And then finally, I think if we do a good job of continuing to assess program efficacy over the long haul, over years, we will again be in a good position to revitalize the nature of what we're doing for gifted and talented students and to keep those programs and services dynamic, fresh, but also effective as they possibly can be. And if they're not, we can find out why that happens to be the case. Well, now I want to turn to what I see as the problems in the field and how those problems might be best addressed. And I've narrowed these problems down to the ones that I think are the most critical that we pay attention to. The first has to do with ensuring that curriculum is differentiated for the gifted. Again, I think we have solutions to that particular problem. They're multi-part solutions. It's not one answer, like, oh, if we just do acceleration, then that will take care of everything. Or if we just have kids doing more projects, then that will solve the issues that we have in terms of differentiation for the gifted. We have to look at multiple approaches, and we have to, again, learn from what has gone before in terms of making it successful now. The first thing, I think, is to use differentiated criteria for the design of curriculum. All research-based curriculum that has come on the market in the past 20 years that has been federally funded, and many curricula that have not been federally funded, have used a set of criteria for the design of curriculum. Criteria that specifically speak to a focus on goals and outcomes, not just activities, and also ways of assessing the nature of the learning. That's an important part of the resolution to differentiated curriculum. The actual design matters. Secondly, I think it's a very good idea to use materials that are already differentiated, not to implement them wholesale, but rather to use them as models. How can I take these and create ones that are similar in design? How can I use certain strategies effectively based on what has already been done and shown to be effective with gifted and talented students? And thirdly, the ongoing professional development of teachers in differentiation strategies. Again, an important strategy and an important issue related to this problem. Some of you might say, well, what is differentiation? It has become one of those buzzwords in our field. It's like the word, love. I love you and I love French fries. Let's not bother to make any distinctions in terms of what that might mean. So it's an important issue, I think, to be sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about differentiation. And I like to think about it as the deliberate adaptation and modification of both curriculum as well as instructional processes, as well as assessments that respond to the needs of the gifted. And the point being that those three aspects of curriculum, instruction, and assessment have to work together in order for true differentiation to be at work. We also know that there are specific ways we can differentiate for the gifted, and that if we are deliberate in our design processes, we can do a little checklist. Is the curriculum that we're offering the gifted more complex? Is it more advanced? Is it in greater depth? Is it more abstract? And does it have a creative component attached to it? That becomes our criterial checklist for ensuring that differentiation is in fact embedded. And I've included a sample task here, which you can read at your leisure. I don't want to take up the additional time right now to walk you through this entire example. But it's an example of beginning to expose students to an understanding of statistics, how we proceed from a pre-testing on statistics to grouping students and then streamlining the teaching for them, and then not focusing necessarily the total project on just the use of statistics at a low level, but rather getting them to apply statistics to real-world data sets and to be able to prepare materials themselves that illustrate how those data sets might be examined. And so we can give students choices of the types of data sets that they can examine and the topics within those data sets that they're most interested in. So this becomes the issue of student choice with the three options you see here. And then being sure that there are good follow-up additional questions that challenge students at a higher level to think about their data once they have manipulated it in terms of graph form and articulated their findings. We then want them to think in a more predictive way about the nature of the trend for the next 5 years, how they would estimate it, and what factors might influence it. So that's an example, if you will, of a product that in fact addresses these higher level skills and these differentiation features that I just described. Well, problem number 2, as you might not be surprised to see, is now not about curriculum, but about instruction. And how do we ensure that this high level thinking and problem solving becomes a part of what goes on? And one way we can ensure that is to use deliberate models that scaffold thinking. I've found myself as a teacher, when I've been involved in piloting many of our own curriculum materials over the years, when I've been a classroom teacher, when I've worked with kids at elementary level as well as middle school and secondary level, that if I don't carefully prepare the nature of the questions that I ask, the nature of the thinking that I want them to do, if I don't have those questions written out ahead of time, I am likely to resort to whatever comes into my head at the moment. And what comes into our heads at the moment may not be either the most apt question nor the most high-level question in terms of what is being studied. So it's very important, I think, to be deliberate about the nature of the instructional approaches that you employ. So I advocate strongly the preparation of higher-level question clusters around delivering content, about using inquiry-based models in a very deliberate way to ensure that higher-level thinking is scaffolded. And then finally, to also use concept development approaches, helping students